Everywhere we look, democracy seems to be in trouble. Only you can protect democracy. Welcome to Section 1 and 2 S.I.D.E, Students in Democracy Education. 10 fundamental principles of liberal democracy and 10 conversations. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to S.I.D.E and to your conversation about the counter-majoritarianism principle. And here's how it goes. The will of the majority must never prevail if it denies or violates any of the preceding fundamentals, that is, the essential principles of liberal democracy, subject only to the reasonable limits principle. So what are we saying here? You'll recall that when we discussed the self-determination principle, we explained that in a free and democratic society, citizens choose their political representatives and their governments, and they consent to abide by the laws enacted by those governments and representatives for society's benefit. But we also saw that a just society is one which both acknowledges the moral equality and dignity of each and every person while also recognizing, accommodating, and protecting differences between and among individuals and groups within society. Differences of race, ethnicity, religion, culture, belief, ability, differences of sex, gender identification, sexual orientation, differences of need based on material, economic, geographic, or other circumstance, and differences of material or political aspiration, ambition, and preference. All of those differences produce a civil society in which the will of the majority or of a plurality of citizens may give rise to policies and laws that adversely affect minorities. And while the will of the majority or a plurality of citizens will generally determine the political agenda as expressed in laws and policies of that majority or plurality, it cannot go unchecked and unchallenged in circumstances in which the rights and interests of minorities are disregarded altogether. The counter-majoritarianism principle recognizes the fact that majorities sometimes get it wrong. They sometimes make mistakes. They sometimes infringe rights without intending to do so. Sometimes the laws that are enacted by legislatures, by parliaments, by houses of Congress are enacted with a very clear understanding that they will adversely affect minorities. But sometimes they just get it wrong. They just make a mistake and they do not understand the effects that their laws or their actions or decisions will have on minorities. In those situations, the courts are there to correct the mistake. The courts may invalidate or strike down the decisions and laws enacted by elected legislatures through the process of judicial review so that it will not have an adverse effect on the rights and freedoms of minorities. If we allowed majorities to rule without some mechanism to test the validity of their decisions and actions, that is, to complain when appropriate that those decisions and actions do violence to the equal dignity of some individuals and some groups in society, and that they trample all over the equality, pluralism, and other fundamental principles, then we would not be living in a truly free and democratic society. Our society would be free and democratic only for some, but not for everyone. Unless a limitation or a restriction on a right or freedom is justified under the reasonable limits principle, which we'll be coming to, the self-determination principle cannot ever be used to abridge or violate any of these fundamentals. Individual and minority rights and freedoms cannot be curtailed by majority rule. This also means that the legitimacy of a law or policy is not exclusively a function of the level of popular support that it commands amongst the general population. Counter-majoritarianism refers to the potential conflict between the decisions of a democratically elected majority and the actions of an unelected body, such as a court or a tribunal, particularly when that body can overrule laws passed by the majority through the vehicle of an elected legislature, such as a parliament or a house of Congress, potentially undermining democratic principles. This creates a tension because the judiciary, not directly accountable to the electorate, can override the decisions of the elected representatives of the people. The legitimacy of an elected government, of a legislative body, flows from the voice and the will of the people expressed in the democratic process. But the legitimacy of the decisions of courts and tribunals doesn't flow from any electoral process. It's not a product of the will of the people. It flows from the exercise of reason and the application of legal or constitutional principles to the interpretation of the laws passed by legislative bodies, and the question of whether those laws infringe or improperly restrict the constitutional rights of certain members of society who may not be in the majority. So the counter-majoritarian principle is a critical principle as a further expression of the pluralism principle and of the equality principle that specifically addresses the issue of minority rights and interests within a broader majority. But counter-majoritarianism arises also in the case of minorities that are defined by the geographic and political makeup of a nation state. For example, in a federal system, such as we find in Canada or the United States and in many other countries, where there is a central government or a national government, but there are also regional governments, provincial or state governments that represent smaller communities or groupings within the larger nation state. And in circumstances where the interests of a particular region may not accord with the general interests of the majority of the members of a society, the counter-majoritarian principle gives voice and expression and recognition to the will, the interests, and the rights of a small state or of a smaller region within the larger nation. So there are many ways in which the counter-majoritarianism principle comes into play in modern day societal arrangements. Counter-majoritarianism as a principle challenges the basic premise of democratically elected government with the recognition that minorities must always be protected and that each and every individual has the right to be treated with dignity, with equal protection under the law, and to the assurance that the will of the majority, even where it properly and validly gets expressed in the laws and the policies of society, can never be used to compromise or infringe or violate the rights and freedoms of any minority, indeed of any individual. Over to you for your conversation about the counter-majoritarianism principle.